Part 43. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 427. Alas, one of them has been solved. Chen Feng held a napkin in his hand and wiped his hands. Garbage is garbage. No matter how exquisitely decorated it is, it will never make it to the table. With such a huge advantage, they were actually suppressed by those three people with their soul bodies. One side even had a winner. Although the other two sides seemed to be still in a stalemate, the stalemate became longer and longer. Longer, then for that kind of old fox, the advantage will be greater. As a senior, the trump card is always something that you don't need to worry about missing. Patience, at least compared to these low-level listeners, seniors will always fill in the gaps. Time has dragged on for so long, and the final balance of victory has already clearly tilted. Lu Chen was also standing by the glass window, looking down. He said, "I have walked step by step to this point with the desire to survive. I am very curious about how they will feel when they see us appear." Feel. I obviously gave them hope and allowed them to move forward step by step, but at the last moment all their hopes were crushed. Sometimes, I am really afraid of this method of broadcasting. At that time, they will realize what the bad taste of radio is. Chen Feng had a slightly gloating smile on his face, but he only smiled for a while and stopped laughing, because he felt that it was indeed not the case. How funny. Lu Chen looked at Chen Feng. They were both audience members and senior listeners. They were exactly the same as the group of people downstairs. They were all senior listeners. Naturally, their feelings were similar. Today you laugh at others for being fooled by the radio. Maybe tomorrow, others will laugh at you for being fooled by the radio. Things are changing, and in the audience circle, this is the norm. The two of them are nothing more than the two lambs that performed better under the shepherd's whip. Because they diligently looked after the shepherd's house and diligently licked the shepherd's boots with their tongues, the shepherd rewarded the two of them with more lambs. A portion of forage. However, the identity of the lamb has not changed at all. The shepherd is still the shepherd, and the lamb is still a lamb. One day the shepherd is in a good mood or a bad mood, he can kill you and make a roasted whole lamb and grill you. The skin is hung on the grill and grilled, and when you are roasted and the fat is sizzling out, you may be able to see many of your own kind in the flock from the corner of your eye, looking at you with indifferent eyes. "Hey, buddy, can you have a cigarette?" Chen Feng turned around and looked at the middle-aged man who had been sitting huddled in the corner. The other party waved his hand and 2 cigarettes were thrown out. Chen Feng took the cigarette and handed one to Lu Chen. "I don't smoke," Lu Chen refused. "Haha." Chen Feng smiled, lit one himself, and then clamped the other one to his ear. All this was done so naturally. "Let's take it step by step." Lu Chen's voice also became a little serious. "This is not a multiple choice question, or even a multiple choice question. So, I can only enjoy the moment first." Chen Feng took a puff of cigarette. "To be honest, it has been a long time since I have had so much time to express my emotions in the story world. I really hope it can be like this in the next story world. Forget it, this time's reward basically means that the broadcast has exhausted all the favorability points we have gained before. Now, it's time to start all over again. It's hard to have such a good thing. Haha, 2 men. We still need to be pretentious at this time." The man with disheveled hair slowly stood up at this time. Obviously he was so happy that he had to put on such a coquettish posture. "It's really disgusting, those low-level listeners failed to live up to expectations and were killed. For you, isn't that what you want to see? If they really kill those 3 people, the strengthened inheritance you have been waiting for will soon be watered down. Is it beautiful?" The man threw the cigarette butt on the ground and stepped on it. "Over there, it's almost over, it's finally our turn." The cigarettes were finished just in time. 3 people versus 3 people, just right, just right. The girl's blood began to float, but Subai didn't even swallow any of it before it completely turned into fly ash and dissipated, just like a man who was about to die of thirst in the desert and jumped desperately into a pool. When he landed, his whole body, the books in the pool, were evaporated in an instant, leaving him not even a handful of slightly moist sand. Subai's body was glowing with white light at this time, and his soul body seemed to be very damaged. Even his original appearance could not be fully revealed. It would not be wrong to say that he was a lonely ghost now, even worse than a lonely ghost. It looks much more miserable. This woman did have a self-righteous scheming, but she was still a little unworthy in front of Subai. She just dragged a soul that was already very embarrassed and awkward. Even if she was facing a child, she was armed with terror broadcasts. A child with weak teeth, if he bites her to death, he will have to break many of his teeth, and even cause himself to be covered in bruises. What's even more speechless is that it's like a gambling table. Terrorist broadcasts don't give you any chance to replenish your chips. They just make you hurt bit by bit and lose all your support bit by bit, leaving you at your weakest and most lonely. It is also the most frightening time to sit on the table where life and death are decided in the final stud. Subai actually knew that he couldn't suck the girl's blood, and he couldn't get any of the essence contained in her body, but he was still unwilling to give it a try and still wanted to give it a try. What the terrorist broadcasters think is the terrorist broadcasters' business, and what they do is their own business. People who easily give up on themselves will not be able to make it today. Can you pass the last level? Subai didn't even expect this anymore. When he was already broken and miserable to this point, no matter how bad or unbearable the low-level listeners were in the next level, there was nothing he could do. Now he didn't even have the strength to bite. How else to fight? Willpower can indeed burst out with terrible power sometimes, but spiritual power is not omnipotent. The original Dalip Jin has long proved this. What surprised Subai was that the other two endings also appeared. Ni Lan and Su Dong were actually still alive. Yes. They are actually still alive. Even if they fight with their soul bodies, they can actually kill their opponents and survive just like themselves. Subai suddenly felt that it was ironic. If the three of them did not consider good, evil and rules, they would all be considered seniors with unlimited potential. Otherwise, they would not be able to get here. However, even a being of the level of a blood corpse can only be said to kill someone. After all, there is no way that the three of them can be said to be so good that the broadcasters would judge them differently, and I don't feel good enough about myself either. After all, the three of them is a sinner. Nien's soul is wrapped in a golden banana leaf. This is her real natal weapon. This scheming woman has not revealed her natal weapon until just now. She has been using it without relying on her natal weapon before. Fighting with the help of strength, she endured it for a long time, hid it for a long time, and held it back for a long time. This kind of city gave Subai a toothache, and he even couldn't understand that a woman who was so obviously sane could actually ruin the lives of more than 1,000 people on an oil tanker because of so-called love, causing her to fall into current situation. Women are truly unpredictable creatures. Su Dong's soul was no longer visible. This did not mean that he was dead, but because when the souls of the three people left the glass, the rectangular glass disappeared, and Su Dong's sword was able to come out. Returning to him, he integrated his soul into the sword, turning himself into the spirit in the sword, using the hardness of the sword as a substitute for his physical body. From this point of view, Subai, who took the advantage first, was actually the one in the worst situation. The distance between the three people was shortened at this time, but there was still a glass wall blocking the three people. In this story world, the appearance of glass walls is really frequent. The transparent material symbolizes an unbridgeable gap, and the irony in this may be what horror broadcasts really want to express. Otherwise, it is not impossible to directly create iron chains or volcanic gaps. Boom. 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 3 bells rang. With a time-honored accent, accompanied by an elusive ancient charm. 3 gates appeared in front of Subai, Lan, and Sudong respectively at this time. This is the last level. Win this round again. Even if the punishment story world passes this time, his previous sins will be wiped out by the horror broadcast. Subai didn't have any mood swings, but he could see Ian's banana leaf flying and hear the trembling of Sudong's big knife. Obviously, those two people still have great hope. They have just made up for their spiritual defects. As long as they can leave the story world alive and recuperate, I believe that breakthrough is only a matter of time. No matter how bumpy the story world is this time, even if there is no reward at all, they are still the biggest winners. However, the haze in Subai's heart still did not dissipate at all, but became increasingly heavy. 3 people came out of the 3 doors. A young man wearing a red suit. A thin man wearing a police uniform. There was also a middle-aged man with unkempt beard and gray face. When the 3 of them walked out of the door, when their senior auras emanated, when the power-enhancing glow of the terror broadcast enveloped them, and when their power increased violently in an explosive way, the banana leaves stopped flying. The broadsword also stopped trembling. A breath of despair. It shrouded the hearts of Sudong and Lan. No, this is impossible. How can it be like this? A hysterical soul wave emitted from the depths of Ian's soul. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 428. From the simple difficulty of delivering food at the beginning, to being exploited step by step, to now, 3 groups of people have successfully survived. The dawn of victory and the hope of survival are actually waving not far away in front of them. Even Subai himself, even though there was always a haze in his heart and an inexplicable sense of depression, he was still working hard and struggling. He didn't want to die, he wanted to live, he wanted to continue living. Subai was like this, let alone Lan and Sudong. Lan didn't take out her natural weapon to pass the test until the end, and kept hiding her natural weapon until the end. This in itself shows that she wants to be the final winner. Strong desire. Yes, the 3 of them are sinners. For various reasons, they made mistakes that are unbearable for horror broadcasters, so they were pulled into the story world. This story world where the 3 of them were completely targeted. There is no main quest. No side quests. There are no rewards and no shortcuts. What the 3 of them have to do, and the only thing they can do, is to struggle as much as possible and survive. This is the most authentic performance and the cruelest stage, just like asking a dancer to take off all her clothes and dance a bloody dance on the tip of a needle. But the 3 of them still endured it and persisted. However, when 3 senior people like him came out of the last door, this wish, this hope that had always supported him, was ruthlessly shattered in an instant. If it is like before, the 3 low-level listeners, even if their strength is forcibly improved by the horror broadcast, no matter how bad the 3 people are, after all, they still have many advantageous factors besides absolute strength, and these factors often determine the victory or defeat is also the biggest psychological support for the 3 of them. However, when the same 3 senior people came out, all the advantageous factors are gone. They are all seniors. Although there may be differences in strength, but if you really want to say who is worse than the other, it is really hard to say. What you have experienced, I have also experienced, and what you have encountered, I have basically encountered. In terms of character, experience, instinct, and many other aspects, the eldest brother does not laugh at the second brother. Moreover, one side has been waiting for work for a long time, while the other side has only a broken soul. This duel was not a fight from the beginning. Moreover, even if the ones who walked out were seniors, terror broadcasting still helped them improve. In order to improve their strength, they also helped them upgrade their magical weapons. It can be said that the gap that was already so huge that it was impossible to see the edge was suddenly widened and turned into a vast ocean. This is not a gap that can be made up by the slogan "Man can conquer nature." In fact, this gap no longer needs to be made up. It cannot be made up at all. The three senior people who had just walked out of the door were almost promoted to close to for advanced listeners. That is equivalent to the level of Yan Hui, Hong Lanlin, and others that Subai had met before. Even if Subai at his peak state faced Yan Huiyang, even if the two sides fought in close combat with bare hands, Subai himself would probably be completely passive and take the beating. What's more, the current Subai is simply a replica of an orphan ghost. Hiss. Chen Feng stretched out comfortably. This feeling of being filled with strength all over his body made him enjoy it very much. It even made him a little intoxicated. This. Is it the level and power of an advanced audience? Sure enough, there is really one heaven and one earth, completely two concepts. In Chen Feng's view, this short-term false increase in strength is already an extremely great reward. It allows you to perceive and contact you in advance. No, to be precise, it allows you to temporarily reach an advanced audience immersed in the scene. The strength and realm, for experienced people, are equivalent to opening the door to new fields. If you have a very clear understanding of your future development direction and trajectory, you will be able to avoid many detours and be less confused in the future. Although this kind of reward cannot be cashed out immediately, it has a long-lasting impact. Even in WeChat stores, this kind of thing cannot be redeemed. Chen Feng looked at Lu Chen from the corner of his eyes. Lu Chen was just like him. He closed his eyes and realized that none of them took the initiative to attack. Even if the enemy in front of them was really out of reach, they only needed to take action lightly. Can crush them to death. But they didn't do anything, and they were not in a hurry, because once the opponent they were assigned was killed, they would have completed the task and would be transmitted back to the real world by a terrorist broadcast. In that case, what they could experience now, the strength he possesses, will be directly cut off by the terrorist broadcast, and he will return to his original strength and realm. This kind of opportunity is hard to come by. Everyone hopes that this kind of time can last a little longer, so that they can understand and experience one more step. Time at this time is real money. Of course, they also have to do tasks, and they can get an enhancement from the same senior people. This is also a great benefit that they cannot be tempted by. In fact, this benefit is no less than that of Ni Lan and Su Dong. The joy brought by having the spiritual shortcomings made up before was not the same. However, people are always greedy, especially the audience, who have to compete with their own lives. Their pursuit of interests and their persistence in interests have reached the point where ordinary people think they are crazy. Ni Lan and Su Dong did not take the initiative to attack. They naturally knew what the people in front of them were doing. If they took the initiative to attack, they would only force the other party to kill them now. However, they were very conflicted because the other party was realizing they are entering a new realm and enjoying opportunities, and they will not change their original intention and ultimate goal of killing themselves. If you don't do anything now, you will just watch the person who is about to kill you realize the opportunity. This is really a dilemma and a great torment. In front of Subai was a middle-aged man with unkempt gray face. After the middle-aged man walked out of the door, he smiled at Subai and said. This smile made Subai a little puzzled, because the other party was not a sneer, a contemptuous smile, not a proud smile, not a smile with other utilitarian and negative qualities, but a very simple smile, and even a smile with a touch of gratitude. Thank you for saving my son that day. When these words came out of the middle-aged man's mouth, his eyes looked a little hesitant. Your son, Subai said a little confused. I'm sorry, you know, I always like to do good deeds and accumulate merit. I have saved too many people and helped too many people. Can you give me some tips? Who is the son? Subai really didn't think about which of his sons he saved, and he didn't know who his son was. Although he had a vague idea in his heart, he was not sure. Otherwise, it would have been too much of a coincidence. Of course, as for Subai saying that he has accumulated more virtues by doing good deeds, that is just nonsense. A firefighter from the night of the explosion in Tianjin, the middle-aged man sighed, "You saved him." If Subai had a body now, his current reaction should be that his pupils suddenly shrank. Really? It's him. It's really him. The young man I saw 3 times in one day. He was actually the son of the man in front of him who was about to kill him. Subai did not regard himself as a benefactor, nor did he have any too simple reveries or hopes in his heart. It was impossible for the other party to repay his kindness by leaving him alone or committing suicide. This is not the way the audience behaves, even if he saves his son. That's really ironic, Subai said a little ridiculously. I saved the son of a man who was about to kill me. The middle-aged man looked very calm. You know that I can't sacrifice anything just to keep you alive. Because of the current situation, I have to take your lives in exchange for my own. I believe that you don't hold on to me either. With that kind of unrealistic idea. Yeah, I didn't think about it that way, but if I could do it all over again, I would probably stand by and open a bottle of beer, watch your son being blown to pieces, and then hold up the glass and shout, "Cheers." The middle-aged man smiled and nodded. If it were me, I would do the same. In fact, when the first explosion occurred, I was already at the scene, but I am better at concealment, haha, because I was strengthened as an assassin. You and your fat friend didn't notice my presence when I didn't release my murderous intent and you were in a hurry. Then why don't you take action to save your son yourself? Subai asked incomprehensively. Are you sure that I will take action and take risks to save your son? The middle-aged man shook his head. I was hesitating at the time, because if I saved him, he would not die, but even if he survived, he would soon listen to the terrorist radio. He should have died. I as his father, if he deliberately saves him, the terrorist broadcast will make him a listener. This is cause and effect. I had actually thought about it at the time. Instead of letting my son survive this time and then become a listener and experience the terrible entanglement and pain, or even die miserably in the story world, there would be no one in this society except me, a father who is also a father. People will remember him again. It is better to let him sacrifice in that explosion, let him be regarded as a martyr, let the whole society remember him, let people praise him. I think my son will also feel the latter better. Then Subai seemed to understand something. Then you really have to thank me properly. Yes, I really have to thank you. Because you and I have never met each other, and you don't know that he is my son. I didn't send you any message to ask you to save him. You have no relationship with my son at all. If you save him, he will not suffer that kind of cause and effect. This is the rule of terrorist broadcasting, and it is also the way to identify terrorist broadcasting. To be honest, at that time, I was hiding in the shadows, waiting for my beloved son to die due to the explosion, and was preparing to take action immediately after his death to collect the body and preserve the bones as much as possible. I saw you suddenly standing on the fire station for no reason. A person in front of the car withstood the explosion damage. At that time, I shed tears. So please once again accept my, a father's, most sincere thanks. The middle-aged man bent down to Subai. Bow. 90 degrees. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 429. It doesn't make sense to say so much now. Subai's voice was as calm as ever. Yes, at this time, if you are not calm, you can't do anything. Too much hysteria, too much asking for repayment, but it makes yourself become like a retarded clown. He dances a dance that he thinks is serious, but in fact it only adds to the laughter. Don't reach out to hit the smiling person, and both parties show extremely sincere sides. You saved my son. Okay, I'm grateful to you, I'm very grateful to you, I'm extremely grateful to you, but apart from being grateful to you, I have nothing else to do to help you. I still want to kill you. I have to kill you too, because I would not say that I would trade my life for yours in order to repay my kindness. You also know this. I saved your son, and you thanked me. Well, you kept thanking me. You thanked me sincerely, but I still want to be killed by you. In my current state, I can even take a bite out of you. It is unrealistic for me to do anything. I can only accept the outcome of being crushed to death by you. Maybe you can show mercy and take the initiative to bear my attack without resisting for a period of time to let me vent my anger. But this process, I think, is more like it's a kind of monkey-like pity. There is no way to change the ending process. After all, it has no meaning at all. I only want a happy death, and I don't want the so-called dignity. Both parties are honest people and they are both understanding people. At this time, the smell of gunpowder has disappeared. Subai is still floating there, and the middle-aged man is still standing there. How long do you need? Subai asked. He knew that for a senior person, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to understand the strength and realm of advanced listeners. The other two sides, separated by glass, they are doing the same thing. The middle-aged man looked at Subai and nodded. If you find this waiting time uncomfortable, I can take action now. I can give up this opportunity for enlightenment as my reward for saving my son. Forget it, although the feeling of waiting to die is indeed not that comfortable, you should understand and experience it first. After all, the opportunity is rare. When you feel it is time to take action, you can inform me in advance, just 1 minute in advance. I'm fine, adjust my mentality. Thank you for your understanding. The middle-aged man thanked Subai again. Subai changed the subject and said, you said before that if I saved your son would not be contaminated with karma, but you were ready to give up at the time. It seems that your research on karma has it's also very in-depth. Even high-level listeners would not dare to say such things. Karma is a coveted poison. I have personally seen several high-level listeners die from karma. It is obviously such a powerful existence. In the end, because it's really ironic to try to study something like cause and effect and end up with a dumbfounding ending. My view of cause and effect only exists in art, not in law. I will not explore the causes of cause and effect, nor will I actively pursue the traces of cause and effect. Instead, I will specifically look at the laws of cause and effect, and know how to do it. What will happen? As for why this happens, I don't know, don't want to know, and don't dare to know. My parents should also be in the audience. Anyway, time is wasted, it is better to communicate before death. Although Subai cannot achieve the state of hearing the truth in the morning and dying in the evening, it is much better than just standing there and waiting for death. They left me a lot of money and left me when I was about 7 years old. I want to know if it is because of this money that I was contaminated by their cause and effect, so that when I became an adult, I would naturally terrorist broadcasts were received. The middle-aged man frowned slightly and said, I need to know what level of listeners your parents are. Yes, this must be clear. If you are a low-level listener, because you are afraid of horror broadcasts, you hug each other to keep warm, and then give birth to a child. When you have nothing to do, you give the child something to nourish the child's body with the things in the WeChat store. If this is the case, it would be unreasonable for this child not to participate in horror broadcasts in the future. It should be better than what I am now, just stronger than weak, Subai replied. In the cave under the sea of Kinhuangdao, the mirror, Gongzihai sent by Lichi, Linzhou from the forum, and many other people were very keen on the mirror and the news about their parents, which is enough to prove from the side that, the strength and status of his parents at that time were definitely higher than his own now. Subai even believed that his parents' strength might have reached the level of high-level listeners, and perhaps even higher, because he was watching the previous when the terrifying broadcast created the scene for him. His father was actually able to notice that he was peeping. "That's impossible," the middle-aged man said seriously. "As a senior, even if you don't understand cause and effect, you should still know some principles and rules. If they plan to have children, as long as they are willing, as long as they are a little more careful, this can still be guaranteed that your children will not become listeners in the future. As for the money left to you, if your family is already rich, much wealthier than the average person, and your parents don't give you money, you will still have enough food and clothing. If this is the case, then the cause and effect is almost the same. It is so small that it can be ignored, and the activities of listeners in the real world are greatly restricted. Relying on the listener's own strength to plunder social wealth can easily be punished by terrorist broadcasts. Therefore, most listeners are in real life. In this world, you just live a good life and don't have to worry about your livelihood, but if you want to be the richest man in a region, and even be on the Forbes rich list, it is equivalent to lighting a lantern in the dark, for fear that the radio will not find you. Subai recalled his family. His parents' backgrounds were actually very good. His father's side was a behemoth equivalent to a red political family. In other words, even if his parents did not leave him such a big family, in a consortium company, at most I live with my family. I may not have much status, and I may encounter some look-downs, but in terms of living a prosperous life, there is really nothing to worry about. If it's what you said, I don't know why I became the audience, Subai replied. In fact, radio is very benevolent, and it will not do anything to kill the listeners, the middle-aged man continued. You can have descendants, as long as you don't use your ability to interfere too obviously with the affairs of your own descendants. For example, if your offspring is about to encounter an accident or is seriously ill and is about to die, and you use your ability to save him, it is equivalent to Monkey King going down to the Hall of Hell and burning the Book of Life and Death. If the person you are supposed to die does not die, then you can only go be the listener, and for the rest, as long as it's not too over the top and not too obvious, the radio will turn a blind eye. What the middle-aged man said was very convincing because he himself is a father. So, what you are saying is that the reason why I am an audience member is because my parents did it on purpose. According to the information you said, it's almost the same. Maybe your parents have different ideas than mine. They may think that being an audience and having the opportunity to experience the experience of being a god may be better than being an ordinary person doing nothing. A lot, so they would make such a choice. The middle-aged man stretched out his hand and touched the isolation glass mirror beside him. It's like this mirror. Looking from the inside to the outside, and looking from the outside to the inside, it's all the same. The love of parents for their children should be the same. The picture suddenly appeared in Subai's mind. His parents were standing at the door, but he was in the belly of another pregnant woman. I don't know why, but every time he thinks of this scene, Subai feels upset in his heart, and his soul floats on the edge of the glass mirror. Perhaps, it's still different. For example, I want to go outside, but the mirror won't let me go. Those people outside want to come to us, but the mirror won't let them come. Although it looks the same and there is no visual deviation, the mirror exists, it does exist, and this is the biggest difference. The middle-aged man was silent. He might have learned something from Subai's words. In fact, he couldn't understand from the bottom of his heart that Subai's parents deliberately let their son enter the broadcast. What was the purpose? Normally, after experiencing the cruel competitive environment of broadcasting, parents will subconsciously let their love crystallize so that their offspring will not follow in their footsteps. Even if they have the power of a god, they have lost the greatest freedom. This god, he is not a true unrestrained god. He cannot even control his own life. Is there any more chicken soup? Sudbai looked at the middle-aged man. I want to hear it before I die. The middle-aged man pursed his lips, then sighed. He stretched out his hand and tapped on the mirror. Maybe you misunderstood your parents. Maybe their level of strength is higher than you imagine. There are many, so you may not be able to see their opinions and their intentions. Just like broadcasting, it will make mistakes, but our level of strength is not enough to really discover the key points of its mistakes, and we cannot talk about taking advantage of this mistake. Therefore, the mistakes of broadcasting are not actually considered as errors. Wrong, because this mistake will not bring any trouble to it. This mistake will be meaningless. Just like in this story world, the glass window used in the broadcast from beginning to end, when you knock it with different strength, the sound it makes is different, which means that when your realm is at different heights, you have different opinions on things. The level of understanding is also completely different. Look. When I tap lightly, it makes a dull sound. When I knock a little harder, it makes a crisp sound. When I knocked with the strength of a veteran, it made no sound and completely digested my strength. When I knock with the strength that is now close to that of an advanced listener. Click. A crisp sound. There is a crack in the glass mirror. Sudbai. Middle-aged man. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 430. The middle-aged man swallowed, as if he couldn't believe what was happening in front of him. Circles of cracks had spread out where he had just started to exert force. It is conceivable that as long as you reach out and push it gently, the glass will break. No matter how strong something is, as long as there are cracks, the countdown to its destruction has already begun. Sudbai looked at the middle-aged man, and the middle-aged man looked at Sudbai again. We were obviously just talking about a bowl of chicken soup, so how could a situation like this arise? You just said that you want to thank me, Sudbai asked. He obviously didn't mean to ask this question at this time. The glass was broken, and the original dead situation was just like a corner of the life was blocked. There was done again. The middle-aged man nodded stiffly, and then looked at his fist absurdly. Why did this glass break? Then, now we have the opportunity to put this gratitude into action instead of just talking about it, Sudbai said. This. The middle-aged man was speechless for a moment. Mirrors can be broken. This means that the situation on the three battlefields can actually be disrupted. The three veterans are realizing their new strengths and realms, and they have not killed the prey in front of them first, so the balance of the situation is still same as in the beginning. If the middle-aged man chooses to break this layer of glass at this time, then go to another battlefield, kill one of the seniors, and then kill a soul like Sudbai. So, for Sudbai, the situation that was inevitable for him to die suddenly gave way to life. 3 against 3, the quota is here. If Sudbai wants to live, he must first let a judge die, leaving a vacant spot. This is the surviving spot. However, all this depends on this middle-aged man, whether he is willing or not. As long as he kills Sudbai, he can leave this story world safely and take with him the benefits that belong to him. And if he planned to save Sudbai, he would have to risk his own life and take the risk to kill another judge. There were many more variables in this. Audiences are all selfish. No, to be precise, ordinary people are all selfish, especially when their own immediate interests are related. People's selfish side will be amplified and exposed. Sudbai was not surprised at all by the middle-aged man's silence at this time. It would have been the same if Sudbai had been in the other man's position. Standing here to comprehend, it is always more direct and profound than relying on fighting to comprehend, Sudbai said. We don't need to talk about the fact that I saved your son, and I don't ask for repayment, but I am willing to make a promise. If you let me go today, I will repay you several times in the future. The middle-aged man raised his hand to signal Sudbai to stop talking. My life is the most important. This was the middle-aged man's answer. Subai didn't know what to say for a moment. What the other party meant when he said this was as if the hope that had just been ignited was suddenly extinguished, and not even a spark could be found. My son's life comes second. You saved my son's life. As long as it's not a situation where I must die, I will repay you. The middle-aged man changed the subject. Subai also breathed a sigh of relief. Brother, you don't speak with such a big breath. The middle-aged man put his hand on the piece of glass that was about to break. I want to ask you one last question. Why did you save my son at that time? Subai could see a hint of enthusiasm in the middle-aged man's eyes. The middle-aged man himself had said before that when it came to cause and effect, he only valued skills and not opinions. Simply put, it was a good thing. I would use it as soon as I got it. As for its principle, I'm sorry, I didn't dare to think or guess. I was willing to go down stupidly. However, it would be an insult to his status as a senior listener if the middle-aged man could not see some clues until now. I don't mind talking to you about that, but do you dare to listen? Subai seemed very candid. The middle-aged man's eager eyes slowly cooled down, and finally he shook his head heavily. I don't dare. Admitting one's own cowardice is something that is difficult for most people to do, but in the matter of cause and effect, admitting one's fear. No shame. Yes, no shame. No shame at all. Even Subai didn't feel any joy or excitement at all when things developed to this point. This time's chance of life was entirely due to his own whim that day in Tianjin, but Subai really didn't dare to think that he was in control of cause and effect. Back then, Lan Lin, as a senior veteran, was able to bring Yan back to Tianjin. Hong and Piao Lu, two people of the same level, are under her, and they even have a good relationship with Li Ji. It is not an exaggeration to say that she is unrivaled, but what will be her ending? Subai could never forget Lan Lin's frightened eyes before she committed suicide. He was as high as her, but in the end he was frightened and became even more pitiful than a rat in a stinking ditch. The middle-aged man slapped the glass, and a piece of glass broke into pieces. Which one are you going to kill? Subai asked. The middle-aged man smiled slightly. I gave someone a cigarette, and in that cigarette were some of the tricks I did. As an assassin strengthener, it's enough for me to do a lot of things. When was it given? Subai asked. Before the opponent was chosen to be me. The middle-aged man did not answer because his figure had disappeared here. Subai floated silently in this narrow space. He did not run around because there was no place to run around. If the middle-aged man did not succeed in killing a judge, then he would still not be able to escape his original fate. After all, no matter how much I run, I can't escape this story world. I have already done what I should do and what I shouldn't do. Now, just wait for the judgment of fate. This may be. This is the real meaning of the name of this story world. The house of Lao Fang's family is very lively now. Quick, switch to Jiangsu TV, I want to watch Joker Shui. The fat man shouted while holding a glass of beer in his hand. At this time, the remote control was in Gyatso's hand. Gyatso smiled silently and switched the channel for the fat man. The monk personally cooked and served a coffee table with vegetarian food. The vegetarian food was exquisitely cooked and garnished with some water and wine. It looked as good as the chefs of those star-rated hotels. The three of them had agreed before that they would live together in Lao Fang's house from now on. After all, after the formation of Lao Fang's house was changed by Fatty, it was equivalent to a very good castle. Living here, safety must be very high. I'm overly worried. Lao Fang didn't deliberately deceive Subai and the others to come in and seize the house. He probably wouldn't be able to break in just by relying on Subai and the others. The little guy was brought to the living room by Jixiang. The little guy seemed a little unhappy. He sat on the sofa alone, neither laughing nor making trouble. Although the fat man had been trying to stir up the atmosphere, When the little guy sat next to him, he consciously put the beer on the table, sighed, and sat down. New Year's Day is here, New Year's Day is here, but there is no New Year's atmosphere here. The monk was holding a bowl and eating slowly. Gyatso was drinking tea there. They were monks and preferred to be quiet. But Fatty really can't stand this kind of atmosphere. Originally, everyone gathered together today just to have a lively atmosphere. After all, we will be neighbors from now on. Although there is no real friendship between the audience, the relationship between us will be closer. Some are always beneficial, and sometimes they can understand each other even if they help each other. It does have a great advantage. To take a step back, even if there is no such absolute interest relationship, a few listeners with similar temperaments can live together. Being together is also a comfortable thing. However, the atmosphere is still not lively. It's not because the monk and Gyatso are indifferent, on the contrary. Although the monk and Gyatso are monks, they also know how to follow the world. However, there are only 3 people left out of the original 4, and they always feel that something is missing. Jixiang lay next to the little guy, looking at the little guy pouting and looking sad. Jixiang was also a little sad, and his tail was wagging weakly. Be good, uncle will take you with me from now on. The fat man reached out and patted the little guy on the head. Brothers, let's take turns taking this baby from now on. After all, he still has the blessing totem given to him by you two. Now his father, I guess it's explained in the story world, this child can't always be left to a cat. The monk nodded and agreed, this child has wisdom and can become a monk with a poor monk. Gyatso also interjected at this time, you can become a monk, but you have to tell me which sect you practice. Obviously, Gyatso is also very fond of the little guys. They can't help themselves. As listeners, they have too much freedom. But it is precisely because they have reached the level of living Buddha in Buddhist legends throughout the ages, so he pays more attention to the inheritance of his own legal tradition, hoping that someone can inherit his mantle in the real world after his death. In the past, Subai was here, and Subai protected the little guy fiercely. If they wanted the little guy to become a monk with them, Subai's father would probably have a mental illness on the spot. Now that Subai is gone, the little guy is really not suitable to continue living in the secular world. Without Subai's protection, he, the soul boy, will be a treasure that will be eyed by many people, not only those in the real world. People in metaphysics and some in the audience may not be able to help but take action. The fat man looked at the little guy, then at Suzai on the coffee table, and said with some annoyance, Monk, I told you earlier that I would just order takeout. If you prepare a vegetarian meal on the table, those who know better think we are having a dinner together, and those who don't know better think we are setting up a table for worship. Hey, the altar table, who is it for? A voice came from the window. The monk, Gyatso, and the fat man seemed to have seen a ghost all of a sudden. The little guy immediately started laughing and patted his little fleshy hands. Daddy, Daddy. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 431. After playing with the little guy for a while, when the little guy was already a little tired, Subai carried the little guy to the bedroom. Seeing that the little guy fell asleep and Ji Xiang was still lying beside him, Subai left the bedroom with peace of mind. Came to the living room. At this time, in the living room, the fat man, the monk, and Gyatso had already removed the food on the coffee table and left some tea. Obviously, they had been waiting for Subai, but they also knew that Subai was interested in the little boy. The guy valued him so much that he managed to survive in a story world where everyone thought he would die, so naturally he had to spend some time with his son first. Subai picked up a cup of tea on the coffee table. The tea was brewed by a monk, and the monk's tea ceremony skills were also excellent. However, Subai felt a bit like a cow chewing peonies at this time, like the herbal tea sold on the street. After finishing the cup of tea, He picked up the fat man's and Gyatso's cups and drank them all in one gulp. Normally, the rich would have to donate a lot of money for incense to get the chance to have a cup of tea made by a truly enlightened eminent monk. But here in Subai, it was as if the cold drinks at home were enough. Of course, he was really thirsty. The fat man rubbed his fingers, looked at Subai, and handed out a cigarette. To be honest, the fat man hadn't come back to his senses yet. Damn it, how did this guy come back alive? Subai's previous actions, in Fatty's opinion, were equivalent to dancing in a bikini in front of the king of hell. Basically, the survival rate was extremely low. Fatty also got some information from other channels, and also knew that the other two were with Subai. Who are the people on trial? Basically, their crimes are similar to Subai's. This time, the radio pulls the three of them into a story world, which is tantamount to eliminating harm for the people. Monk and Gyatso also agreed on this point. They also felt that Subai's killing of Taizi and Juner in Kinhuangdao was indeed too reckless and reckless. Although Subai often suffered from mental illness in the past, that was in the story world. Whoever you dislike or want to kill, as long as you can survive the mission, everything will be fine and nothing will happen. In the real world, the constraints of broadcasting are different. The reason why this real world can still maintain smoothly is that the United States can continue to happily conduct presidential elections and handovers. The Park Geun-hye scandal in South Korea continues to ferment and develop, and China is competing with many small countries in the South China Sea. Everything is based on the fact that the radio strictly limits the listeners below it. Otherwise, once the chains of the radio are loosened, once these listeners who are comparable to gods lose their shackles, it will really be like the devil coming back to the world. The order of the real world will disappear in an instant. Subai reached out to take the cigarette, lit it, and took a deep breath. He had been a lonely ghost in the story world for a long time. If you want to smoke, you have no body, no mouth, no lungs. Now that you are alive, you can. After entering the story world, the radio naturally restored Subai's body, and he could finally have a good cigarette. I'm really lucky to be able to come back alive this time. Subai blew out a smoke ring and sat down on the sofa. Indeed, we all thought you had given the information. You also saw that these two monks are vying to adopt your son as a young monk. The fat man spoke honestly, and there was actually nothing to hide. The audience did not like the taboo politeness of ordinary people. We all live with our heads hung on our waists. How could there be so many twists and turns? It is normal for you to die today and for him to die tomorrow. Subai also told the three people what happened in the story world this time, but he also deliberately blurred the part about cause and effect. He just said that he saved the guy's firefighter's son, and in the end, something happened by accident. While giving an example, I accidentally broke the glass. Of course, based on the thinking of everyone here, even if Subai didn't say this, they could guess that these three people are all human beings. A few days before entering the story world, I happened to save his son during an explosion in the Tianjin cargo area, and then happened to meet his father in the last round of the story world's fatal round. This made people think about those two words. Think. However, whether it is the fat man, the monk, or Gyatso, they all know how scary those two words are, and no one deliberately touches on that topic. At most, it is just an insinuation. They do not shy away from life and death, but they are really secretive about the two words of cause and effect. Amitba, you are really lucky this time. The monk looked at Subai and said seriously, but some things are so coincidental that they may no longer be coincidences. This is a reminder from the monk. Compared to other listeners, the monks are the ones who have the most thorough understanding of the word karma, because Buddhism originally talks about karma, and Fatty, the orthodox successor of Taoism, because of his actions. The styles and methods are very different, coupled with the style of Taoists who have endless fun fighting with the sky. The thinking and summary of cause and effect are still inferior to those of monks. Subai nodded, I know. At this time, Gyatso picked up a hot water kettle next to him and added some hot water to the empty teacup on the coffee table. In the past, people often said that God is above. Believers like to say that God is above, and Buddha is above, but above our heads as the audience, we all know who is truly above. If it is heaven, then the two words we fear and covet are actually not the will of heaven, but its meaning. I have always been curious and have met some senior listeners and even advanced listeners. Most of them are very secretive about these two words. Of course, there are some people who are really addicted to these two words. However, some of them his fate made me a little bit unbearable to look at. Although there is no absolute freedom in becoming an audience, the qualifications and status are still there. Their final end is both funny and pitiful. Sudbai's eyes narrowed slightly. Only then did he realize that the two monks, Gyatso and the monk, had a much better and more comprehensive understanding of cause and effect than the client himself. Also, not only are they making progress, the three of them are actually making progress constantly, and the pace is probably not slower than themselves. No matter what, improving one's absolute strength is the real right path, the monk said seriously. Let go of those two words if you can. The poor monk always feels that those two words are like the same thing. It's just a bait to lure people up to bite the hook. Hey, don't mention that thing in the clouds. Since Dabai is back alive, there is no chance for you two little monks. Haha, come, let's drink tea instead of wine. Let's have a drink first, and then sleep well and rest. To put it bluntly, it took 10 years for us to cross the same boat. It is also a kind of fate that the four of us have the opportunity to live under the same roof. I, Zhongbei, am not a religious person, but at this time, I really want the four of us to be safe and sound. From now on, if we have nothing to do, we can still gather together in the living room to drink tea, watch TV, and brag, and no one will die. This is most. The fat man raised his teacup, and Sudbai and Monk Gyatso also raised their teacups. Maybe. This is the most simple wish among the audience. This night, Sudbai did not sleep very well. He woke up several times during the night. It was not because the world of the previous story had a great psychological impact on him, nor because Sudbai was still obsessed with the word cause and effect. It was just because that time after living as a lonely ghost for a while, I got used to the floating feeling of my soul. After having a body again, I was not very used to it. I still felt like I was floating when I was lying on the bed. This is a bit like when a person comes ashore after swimming in the water, he will feel a little floating. Because he has adapted to the gravity and buoyancy in the water, his body has not yet adjusted after he came ashore. The little guy slept soundly. He held Sudbai's arm and curled up in Sudbai's arms. His little mouth was pouting. He looked very cute. When Sudbai couldn't sleep, he would look at the little guy. When sleepiness came over, he would look at the little guy. Just close your eyes and sleep for a while. After sleeping intermittently like this, when Sudbai woke up, it was almost 10 o'clock in the morning. The little guy was probably taken by Jixiang to the living room or to play in the yard. After stretching, Sudbai left the bedroom and went to the bathroom to wash up. While washing up, he took out his cell phone and took a look at it. He found that there were dozens of missed calls, and they were actually from Chuzhou, and the calls had been made 2 days ago. It was still there last night, but Sudbai was used to setting the phone to silent mode. At the same time, he was still in the story world 2 days ago. When he came back last night, he just chatted with Fatty Monk and the others and rested. I really didn't watch it. Cell phone. Sudbai didn't answer the call, but just washed up quietly by himself. When he came to the living room, he saw the fat man lying on the sofa playing with his mobile phone. Dabai, did you go out to vent last night? The fat man suddenly asked. Sudbai was a little confused. What's wrong? I mean, Max, were you too stressed out in the last story world, So you went out alone to relax and decompress last night? No, I was in the bedroom last night, Sudbai replied. Hey, this is weird, Fatty said and handed his mobile phone to Sudbai to see. This is the mobile app of the audience forum. There are 2 new posts in the Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Shanghai sections, with the titles. Which vampire-enhanced man is so fierce and not afraid of punishment according to the broadcasting rules? I know the ID who posted the post. He is a forensic doctor in Shanghai, Fatty said as he helped Sudbai click on the post. There were many pictures in it. They were corpses that had been drained of blood, and the places where these corpses were first discovered were either in inconspicuous trash cans on the street, or in single apartments where they lived alone. Dabai, you really didn't do it, the fat man is really not sure now. In Qinhuangdao, Sudbai dared to kill Tai Zi and Junior. Who knows if he is addicted to breaking the rules and going out to do a lot of work at night? Indulge in human blood again? This is a relatively famous supernatural incident. If you are interested, you can search for Shanghai vampires in the 1990s. Little Dragon Press. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 432. I must be sick, am I such a fragile person? Sudbai pushed away the cell phone that the fat man put in front of him and sat down on the sofa. There were some pistachios on the coffee table. Sudbai grabbed some and peeled them. He got up late, wasn't hungry, and didn't plan to eat breakfast, just eat whatever you want. The fat man was a little puzzled and said, that's interesting. Is it possible that there are other vampire enhancers in Shanghai? Or is it someone from the West? As we all know, due to cultural differences and historical factors between Eastern and Western audience circles, some specific reinforcements present 2 completely different situations in the East and the West. For example, blood clan enhancement is very popular in the West, but few people choose it in the East. Similarly, Taoist monk enhancement is more common in the East, but few people choose it in the West. Investigating the reason, one of the reasons is conceptual preference, but it is also because the West has this kind of vampire history and culture. Vampire intensifiers can find some vampire relics in Western monuments, while Taoist intensifiers in the East can also go to the cave heaven blessed land in the mountains. Gain some opportunities and inheritance, so the key is which aspect is easier to strengthen and adapt to local conditions. It's unlikely that the vampires from the West came to Shanghai to kill people and suck blood. Sudbai smiled, there should be an unwritten tacit understanding between the 2 circles, and if the sky falls, there will be taller people to hold it up. If there really is, when Western enhancers come to the East to kill people, those so-called administrators who can check the news through the back end of public accounts should be the first to sit still. That's the same truth, the fat man nodded. Is it because some psychotic lunatic strengthened the vampire bloodline and then killed people and sucked blood in Shanghai? Sudbai rolled his eyes at the fat man. Why do these words sound worse than criticizing mulberry trees and blaming Hawaii trees? Sorry, slip of the tongue, that's not what I meant. Fatty shrugged. If that's the case, maybe one of the 4 of us will receive a real-life mission to catch that guy. Fatty heard what Sudbai said about the benefits finally obtained by the 3 people in the last story world who flattered the broadcaster and worked hard to help the broadcaster do real tasks, so now he is determined to be a person who serves the people. If he listens to the broadcast, 5 good young people who follow the radio. If you're interested, just wait. I guess you won't be able to wait. That's not something done by the vampires enhanced by broadcasting, Sudbai said firmly. What do you think of that? Fatty asked a little surprised. Is it possible that there really are vampires in the real world, and then they came to Shanghai to cause trouble in the world? Sudbai spit out some fruit shells and said, the enhancements in the broadcast are all orthodox methods. Even if I strengthened the ruined vampire blood at the beginning, it just didn't have the inheritance of blood magic, but from the orthodox point of view, he said, I am also a descendant of the Hongmiao clan. After all, broadcasting is not a Jiangnan leather factory, so I won't play shoddy tricks. If you look carefully at those photos, judging from the wounds on the corpse and the uneven expression of the corpse being sucked blood, that guy is not an orthodox vampire at all, but just a bloodthirsty murderer. When orthodox vampires suck blood, they usually suck blood from the upper and lower arteries in the neck, slowly sucking out the entire carton of milk as if inserting a straw into yogurt. But in the photo you just showed me, there are many wounds on the body. Which proves that the murderer kept biting the wounds to suck blood, and the corpse was swelling and swelling at the same time. It was not the same as the orthodox vampires reinforced by the broadcast. When the fat man heard this, he understood something. Damn it, I really have a specialization in the art. I understand when you say this. In this case, I am even more concerned about this matter. A man-made man appeared for no reason vampire, maybe he was affected by something or radiated somewhere, maybe if we find him, we can get the whereabouts of some treasures. Fatty has always been happy to pursue treasures, and he is not willing to let go of any clues. Subai suddenly remembered something and asked, Fat man, where did you get that drop of vampire blood you exchanged with me last time? Subai has always been puzzled about this matter. The value of that drop of blood is absolutely unlimited, but it seems that he exchanged the compass of the black enhancer with the fat man, and this drop of vampire blood was only exchanged by the fat man. One of the products is a bit similar to adding a head. That drop of blood. I met a Western enhancer in a story world and got it from him, the fat man said indifferently. In this case, Subai stopped asking. It seemed that the fat man didn't know the value of that drop of blood, otherwise he wouldn't have given it to Subai so stupidly. Okay, Dabai, I'm going to go out and see if I can find any trace of the vampire. Now the news in this regard has been blocked on the internet, and the police are forced to search everywhere. I think Fatty is going to my son can be transported again. The fat man happily walked out of the house and pushed the battery car out in the yard. The fat man could actually drive, but on the one hand, Shanghai is prone to traffic jams, and on the other hand, he needed to walk through the streets, so the battery car was more convenient. Subai wasn't very interested in this matter, but thinking about it, Chu Zhao kept calling him, and it was probably what Fatty thought at first, that he had nothing to do to beat teeth and kill people to suck blood. This idiot. Subai cursed and didn't bother to call Chu Zhao back. In Subai's heart, that guy Chu Zhao had nothing to do with him. The little guy was playing on the slide with Jixiang in the yard. Some of the toys and facilities in the yard were bought by Fatty during the 2 days when Subai was away. It seemed that Fatty was really interested in the little guy, and he probably wanted to make up for his debt. The meaning of Subai sunk his body into the sofa. The sun was shining outside, and lying leisurely on the sofa alone was a rare enjoyment for him now. However, this period of enjoyment was destined to be short-lived. Subai's cell phone rang again. He glanced at it and saw that it was a WeChat call from Sunur. Picked up the phone and answered. Hey, Subai responded weakly. Subai, where are you now? I went to your office several times and found that you are not here, and neither are your children. Have you moved? Well, we've moved. Is there anything wrong? It's nothing, I just want to ask you. Okay. Subai didn't tell Sunur where he lived now, and Sunur also felt a deliberate coldness in Subai's tone. To be honest, this is actually a manifestation of Subai's selfishness. He feels that it is good for him to live here now. He has Fatty Monk and the others as roommates and everyone gets along very comfortably, so he does not intend to tell Sun about his location. Or Chu Zhao. Although Sunur's relationship with him was different from Chu Zhao's relationship with him, Subai vaguely felt that the strength gap between himself and Sunar was a bit big. It was not that Subai felt that there was a huge disparity in status between the two. Therefore, Sunar's association with him was a high level of achievement, but because Subai felt that it was precisely because of the huge disparity in strength and status between the two parties that Sunar might be punished if he was too close to him. How much benefit you get from me, the broadcast will correspondingly increase the difficulty in your story world to achieve a balance. Otherwise, those advanced listeners can completely raise their own private army. Subai felt that the reason why Gongzihai had the strength of Lichi but was surpassed by him was because of this. If possible, it was impossible for Lichi not to help Gongzihai improve his strength. As for what Sunar would think, Subai didn't bother to think about it. He wasn't the kind of person with a mother-in-law personality. After getting up, Subai went to the kitchen and started cooking some vegetables. The monk and Gyatso went out and probably wouldn't come back for lunch at noon, so Subai cooked less. Jixiang didn't eat human food, so he just followed. The little guy just eats it. The two cooked a bowl of seaweed and egg drop soup. After Subai brought it out, he took the little guy back from the slide. The father and son had lunch leisurely, and then went to the yard to bask in the sun together. There were several kites flying in the sky, making crisp sounds from time to time. The little guy pointed at the kites in the sky and was very excited. Subai knew that this kite was a famous whistle kite in Nantong. When it flew into the sky, the whistle was blown by the airflow, making a crisp sound. Seeing that the little guy liked looking at it so much, Subai simply carried the little guy out of the courtyard, planning to go outside to take a look. When Jixiang saw Subai taking the child, he went back to the house, probably to admire the painting again. After going out, the little guy kept waving his little fleshy hands and raised his little head high. He was very happy to watch the kites flying in the sky. "Good boy, I'll buy you some kites tomorrow and let's fly them together." Subai's doting on the little guy naturally goes without saying anything. At this time, Subai was holding the little guy and standing on the road outside Laofang's house. There were open fields on both sides of the road, and the field of view was very wide. The group of kite flyers were also in the fields. A van was coming from the highway, and Subai gave way. Only when the van was about to pass by Subai, his brows suddenly frowned. The smell of blood. The fresh smell of blood. For a vampire, you can be ignorant of grains, you can be ignorant of oil, salt, soy, and vinegar, you can be colorblind, you can be a road idiot, but it will definitely not change a vampire's sensitivity to blood. Subai immediately turned around, and the cab of the van happened to be at the same level as Subai. There was a man in a cowboy suit and a hat driving in the cab. He didn't notice a young man walking with a child on the side of the road. But Subai saw clearly. There is still a trace of blood on the corner of this man's mouth. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 433. The fat man rode his little electric donkey out to look for the vampire at noon. If he knew that Subai could meet the person he was looking for by taking a walk in front of the house with the child, he would probably be so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. The van was driving very fast, kicking up some dust. Subai's eyes narrowed, and he continued to hold the little guy firmly with both hands, but he was already running quickly. His speed was not inferior to the van, and he even started to catch up. This was because Subai was worried that the little guy's delicate skin and tender flesh would not be able to withstand the pressure caused by too fast speed, so he deliberately slowed down. No matter what, Subai didn't have much interest in this vampire before. The little guy was the most important thing in his heart. The young man in denim clothes driving the car seemed to have seen the person chasing after him in the reflector, and he stepped on the accelerator. It seemed that he planned to throw Subai away completely. This move of the other party made Subai feel a little interesting. Ordinary people would be shocked when they see a person who can catch up with a speeding vehicle by relying on his own speed. However, This guy stepped on the accelerator very decisively. The little guy chuckled in Sudbai's arms, seeming to like the feeling of running. Sudbai lowered his head and looked at the little guy, and found that he didn't feel any discomfort due to the speed. Perhaps, he was too fast. He became a normal child. How could a child who was born in the belly of a great demon from the Fox clan gather the aura of heaven and earth and be so fragile? He was thrown into a water tank by himself on the first day after he was born and could paddle and play by himself. What's more, not to mention that he was blessed by two eminent monks, Gyatso and Monk. Never mind. Are you accelerating? Then let's have some fun. Sudbai kicked the ground with one leg, and he directly stepped on the road to create a small crater, and his whole body was ejected like a cannonball. Even in battle, Sudbai often used this rapid explosion method. I bully you with my physical strength. In an instant, Sudbai came to the side of the cab door, stretched out his hand, pulled the door down directly, and then sat in smoothly. The man in jeans was a little shocked. A young man holding a child sat in his passenger seat in such a simple and crude way. He finally stepped on the brakes. Click. The van screeched to a halt on the side of the road. The man in jeans gasped for air, lowered his head, and glanced at Sudbai from the corner of his eyes from time to time. You don't look stupid either, Sudbai said while teasing the little guy in his arms. It felt like talking about home life, but the environment was a bit strange. In the back seat of the van, there were two female corpses lying. The female corpses died in extremely miserable conditions. One body has been sucked of blood, but the other body has not yet. Fortunately, the little guy was in Sudbai's arms and couldn't see what was going on behind him. Although Sudbai felt that the little guy dared to climb into the demon's den by himself, so he probably wasn't necessarily afraid of such a bloody scene, but as a father, he had to be a little cautious. The way you look after a child. Two fangs were exposed from the corners of the denim man's mouth. His eyes were slightly red at this time, and his breathing became much heavier. His hands were trembling slightly, as if he was engaged in a fierce psychological struggle. However, the final ferocity began to slowly gain the upper hand, and his eyes were eventually replaced by crimson. One hand immediately grabbed Sudbai, and the other hand grabbed the child in Sudbai's arms. It seems that he didn't really lose his mind. Sudbai's eyes widened. For a vampire to be so presumptuous in front of him, it really felt like he was doing his own thing. At that moment, Sudbai's aura suddenly changed, and his whole body immediately switched to the vampire state, and a noble aura of the vampire emerged. Ah! The man in jeans let out a cry, and the two hands that were originally grabbing Sudbai froze at this moment. A kind of crushing coming from the depths of his blood made him very uncomfortable. Deep in his heart, he couldn't help but feel the surge. There is a feeling of wanting to worship. The man kept making hoarse sounds in his throat, unwilling, still unwilling, but as a vampire, when facing a high-level vampire, it was like meeting his natural enemy. No matter how crazy he was, this instinct still, he was forced to kneel down in front of Sudbai in the narrow cab. The little guy looked at Sudbai with wide eyes. He felt very happy wherever he went. Even though his father had changed his state and his temperament had also changed dramatically, he didn't care at all and still treated him very affectionately. He continued to stay in Sudbai's arms, but seemed a little sleepy and yawned a little. Sudbai took out his cell phone and called Fatty. Hello, Fatty answered the phone with a loud voice. It looked like he should be on the side of the road, surrounded by the sound of cars. The person you are looking for is with me. Damn it, Dabai, didn't you say you weren't interested anymore? You're also duplicitous. The fat man looked very unhappy. He's at the door of his house. Sudbai was a little speechless. It would really be a bit unreasonable for Sudbai to ignore people when they passed by his door. Damn, is there such a good thing? Fatty shouted. Nikan, help me keep an eye on him, I'll be right back. After hanging up the phone, Subai looked at the guy kneeling at his feet. Subai could sense that the vampire aura on him was very mottled and not pure at all. It was a bit like a drink mixed with water, although there was still some trace of it. A little taste, but definitely not the real taste. The opponent's shoulders kept shaking. It seemed that he had never given up resistance. Subai turned his head and looked at the two female corpses in the rear seat. One looked like a high school student and the other looked like an urban white-collar worker. Really? Killing innocent people indiscriminately? Subai shook his head. Things that had nothing to do with him originally had a little to do with him after the two female corpses appeared. After that, when the fat man came back, no matter what the fat man's purpose was, in short, this guy, afterwards it must be solved. If he leaves in the end and continues to wreak havoc, the blame for the people he killed will all be blamed on Subai. You have seen him, he surrendered under your feet, but you did not deal with him, and he went out to continue killing people. Although you, Subai, were not the ones who committed suicide, but I did not kill Boran, but Boran died because of me. Where is the broadcast? At least some karma must be attributed to Subai. The little guy looked sleepy, but Subai didn't want to take this guy to Lao Fang's house, so he just waited for the fat man here. 5 minutes passed, and the fat man still hadn't come back, and the aura of the man in jeans had long since faded, and his fangs had disappeared. At first, he was swaying, and finally he just leaned on the edge of the seat and fainted. This was after Subai released his vampire aura before, forcing the vampire aura in his body to boil in response. Subai sat motionless, but directly drained him in this simple way. There is no way, the level gap between the two sides is indeed too big. In the field of vision, a black Audi car appeared. The Audi car stopped on the side of the road. The people in the car did not get out, but Subai felt a gaze staring at him from inside the Audi car. Oh! Is anyone still following him? Subai continued to hold the sleeping little guy with one hand, and reached out with the other hand to roll up the sleeves of the man in jeans. Sure enough, on the other man's wrist, Subai saw a laser tattoo, and inside the wrist, there should be a device similar to a signal transmitter embedded in it. It's such a cliched plot, but it's actually artificial. No wonder this vampire aura looks so mottled to me. It turns out that it is really artificial zibe. When Subai thinks of artificial things, a series of movies represented by Resident Evil naturally come to mind. Although these movies are unique in style and expression, the reason why they have become so popular is, in the final analysis, after all, it is because humans have always had an endless impulse and interest in tapping their own potential and expanding their own power. However, the existence of radio is, after all, a secret only known to the listeners. Even if radio has created existences comparable to God's, the public and the government in the real world have no idea. Back then, Chu Zhao, the reason for the initial misunderstanding with Subai was because Subai could not explain the matter of broadcasting at all. He talked about broadcasting and things about broadcasting, whether it was language, writing or other media, or even it's a memory, and it will be directly erased by the broadcast. Back then, for some unknown reason, Lychee went to England and destroyed a small city. For such a big thing, broadcasting could still smooth it over without leaving any trace. Therefore, even though each of the listeners lives in this society, both private scientific research institutions and major governments have still not given up their research and desire for artificial humans. Just when Subai felt that this was really a cliched process, a black motorcycle came speeding from the other side of the road. It was not the fat man. The fat man was riding a small electric donkey. When the motorcycle approached the Audi car, at that moment, the man in the car jumped out, smashed the window glass with one punch, and entered the Audi car. The whole process went smoothly. Immediately afterwards, from Subai's perspective, you could see that the Audi car window was directly covered with a thick layer of plasma. Soon, the door of the Audi was opened and the man came out. He was wearing black leather boots, black sunglasses, and his entire body was covered under a black coat. He is not a listener, because the energy aura on his body is very weak. At most, he can only be regarded as a person who pays attention to exercise. However, when he appeared in Sudbai's field of vision, Sudbai's breathing accelerated suddenly. Without him, just because Sudbai sensed the aura of a high-level vampire in this ordinary person, and even in terms of quality, it was even higher than the bloodline that Sudbai had now. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 434. This is a very strange feeling. The man in front of him obviously has no strength, but Sudbai can sense a bloodline in him that is purer than his own. An ordinary person with the blood of a high-level vampire? Subconsciously, Sudbai thought of Linzhou. At first, Linzhou approached Sudbai as a corpse, but in the end, his identity was revealed. Empty, maybe the person who had the last laugh on that deep-sea platform was Linzhou. Once bitten by a snake, Sudbai had been afraid of straw ropes for 10 years. It was not that he was afraid anymore. He just gained wisdom after being bitten. The deformed body of the other party still made Sudbai a little unsure of the context. The other person took off his sunglasses. He was a young man who looked very delicate, even a little thin. Judging from his age, he was probably in his early 20s, but the kind of look he showed on his body, the vicissitudes of life and the introverted depth in his eyes are definitely not something that a young man in his 20s can possess. In fact, Sudbai had the illusion that the person in front of him was not a young man, but an old guy who didn't know how old he was. Again. The second Linzhou. When facing Linzhou, Linzhou also performed an aura of vicissitudes of life. Later it was proved that this was just the forum administrator's good acting skills, and through the layout of Lu Fuquan, Ying Ying etc., and many details. The impact on the parties concerned is also very great from the side. But when this young man stood in front of him, without saying anything or doing anything, Sudbai felt like an antique. The young man pointed at Sudbai and signaled Sudbai to get out of the car. This is not arrogance, but a very direct and decisive way of expression, similar to being unsociable. Sudbai smiled slightly and got out of the van with the little guy who had already begun to snore. The young man's eyes swept over the little guy. He seemed to be confused as to why Sudbai, who was holding a baby, appeared on this occasion. Sudbai realized that the murderous intention that the other party originally had on him dissipated because of seeing the little guy. Ah! The father actually took advantage of his son. The young man walked to the van and stretched out his hand to pull the man in jeans out. The man in jeans was still unconscious. There was nothing that could be done about it. His fatigue came from the fatigue in his blood, the fatigue from deep in his blood. By this time, he had fallen into a coma. The two female corpses in the back seat of the van naturally did not escape the young man's eyes. When he saw the two female corpses, the young man was not too surprised. His eyes showed a kind of indifference to human life. To be honest, Sudbai is like this sometimes, but Sudbai is because he killed too many people in the story world. In addition, with the continuous improvement of strength and life level, no matter how calm your heart is, your subconscious mind will definitely get better. I no longer regard myself as an ordinary person. You are a god and they are human beings. Gods are noble and ants are despicable. Is the life of an ant worthy of your attention? Of course, Sudbai hasn't gone to this extreme level yet, but many listeners who are far less powerful than Sudbai have actually had this mentality for a long time. Is this young man also an actor? If Linzhou is an excellent actor and planner, then if this young man is really acting like Linzhou, his acting skills will be enough to win the little golden man. You go. The young man said coldly to Sudbai, and then he grabbed the cowboy man's neck with one hand, apparently intending to pull it off. Sudbai took a step forward and appeared beside the young man. He did not speak, but just shook his head at the young man. What a joke, This cowboy man was what the fat man wanted. Although Subai himself planned to kill him, he had to wait for the fat man to come back before killing him. Don't be ignorant, the young man warned Subai. The smile on Subai's lips never faded, but he still shook his head calmly. Oh, you are still threatening me. The young man took out a gun and pointed it directly at Subai's forehead. The gun was obviously modified, and the bullets in it were probably more lethal than ordinary bullets. It's just that trying to scare Subai away with a gun is really looking down on the capital of a senior audience. If what you were holding was a Hellfire shotgun, I really wouldn't dare to let you point it between your eyebrows so blatantly, but you are holding this weapon, which is not out of the category of ordinary firearms. The baby really can't be afraid. Seeing that there was no fear on Subai's face, the young man narrowed his eyes slightly, let go, and the cowboy man fell to the ground. I don't have to kill him, but you have to promise me that after you've used him, you won't let him run around anymore. After speaking, the young man walked directly to his motorcycle. Subai patted the little guy's back with one hand. The little guy pouted and continued to sleep soundly. Did I let you go? Subai asked. The young man stood still. My home is right here. If you don't mind coming in for a cup of tea, Subai invited. As for the corpses in the Audi and the corpses in the van, I guess Fatty will be back soon anyway, so let Fatty clean them up. The young man pursed his lips, turned around, and looked at Subai seriously. Drinking tea? Why not drink human blood? That's a good question. Subai knew clearly that this meant that the other party had actually seen that he was a vampire a long time ago. However, young Master Su's aura can be freely released now, and the other party may only be able to sense the bloodline brewing in his body, but not his own strength. Human blood, Subai's face showed a trace of aftertaste. I haven't drank it for a long time, and I really miss it. In fact, due to Subai's own misophobia and the fact that he was not only strengthened by the blood race, it was difficult for him to express the habits of other vampire enhancers, such as the desire for blood. Nowadays, Subai usually only thinks of sucking human blood after being injured, and it must be the blood of a strong person. In addition, since the fusion of the natal weapon, Subai can automatically escape from the living body that has just been killed. Extracting the remaining power of the opponent and integrating it into himself, Subai really rarely has the urge to drink human blood. Of course, the extreme enjoyment of drinking human blood when he was injured still exists in his mind. I have very fresh human blood there. Are you interested in tasting it together? The other party invited Subai. Subai nodded. Let me settle the child back home first. The other party indicated that it was okay. At this time, a small electric donkey had already driven over. Subai felt really sorry for the battery car under the fat man's crotch, as if it might be crushed by the fat man's weight at any time. Holy shit, what the hell is going on? Are you having a human bonfire party? The fat man leaned the battery car against the wall and walked over. There were 2 female corpses in the van, and there were probably a few corpses in the Audi. It was really uncomfortable to suddenly have so many corpses piled up in front of his house. Fat man, please cook some food here. The guy in jeans is the person you are looking for. I will put the child back to take a nap first. After Subai finished speaking, he returned to the house. When Subai put the little guy on the bed in the bedroom, Ji Xiang came back from the yard and lay down next to the little guy. Sometimes, having a pet cat like this beside you really saves the day. It saves effort because it makes you feel more at ease when taking care of your children than if you take care of your children by yourself. When Subai walked out of the house, 2 bonfires were burning. The Audi car and the van were wrapped in the flames, and there were some small flags around them, so when ordinary people looked here, their sight would be obscured. Only some gray smoke can be seen, which is similar to burning orange sticks. The young man was sitting on his motorcycle, wearing a helmet. He didn't try to slip away. Maybe on the one hand, he sincerely wanted to invite Sudbai, a vampire, to his home. Of course, Sudbai recognized more that Fatty here, he dare not leave. Sudbai drove out his pusa, and the fat man threw the cowboy man into the trunk first, and then got in the car. The young man immediately started his motorcycle and led the way, and Sudbai also started his car and followed behind. The fat man lit a cigarette and stretched his hand out the window to shake off the ashes. Dabai, why does this guy look so old-fashioned? He looks completely 70s and 80s. He looks really similar to the Linjo from before. Sudbai smiled, more real than Linjo. Haha, I don't know if it's his acting skills or something, but he's also a vampire? A vampire who's not an audience. Sudbai nodded. That would be interesting, but don't dig it out like a pit and let us jump out of it. Let's take a step and see. If he hadn't taken a fancy to the other party's bloodline, Sudbai would not have been interested in playing games with him. But whether it was true or not this time, it was just the same as Linjo's. At least Sudbai could confirm that the other party had the bloodline of a vampire who is one rank higher than himself is real and unmistakable. The young man drove his motorcycle into an old community. Sudbai parked the car outside the community and followed him in, because it was difficult for cars to drive into this old campus. He's really quite honest, Fatty muttered. Sudbai and Fatty followed the young man upstairs. The young man lived on the top floor. He took out the key, opened the door, and walked in, leaving the door open for Sudbai and Fatty. The place where I live is quite remote. This should be a demolition area that was originally planned, but a few stubborn households probably disagreed, so it has been kept. By the way, Dabai, when Linjo was acting last time, what did you say he was? Oh, by the way, the Kuomintang officers during the anti-Japanese war, also incited my patriotic feelings. The fat man took out another cigarette and held it in his mouth, while taking out a newly purchased lighter and preparing to light a cigarette. However, when the fat man walked into the door, he immediately saw a yellow military uniform hanging at the entrance, with a blue sky and white sun badge sewn on the cuff of the uniform. Seeing this scene, the flames on the fat man's fingers accidentally touched the flesh of his chin, causing the fat man to gasp in pain. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 435. The blue sky and white sun badge, damn, it looks sexy. The fat man's little eyes immediately glowed, but he didn't really mind that his chin was burned by the flames made by his fingers. It is true that Fatty is as greedy as a cat after seeing magical artifacts, but his hobbies are not limited to magical artifacts. As far as Sudbai knows, Fatty also has a lot of antiques, calligraphy and paintings in his bedroom. Sudbai has also seen it. There are many authentic works of famous people hanging on it. Moreover, Fatty is one of those collectors who is not deliberately paranoid. He only collects things that he thinks are interesting, rather than just limiting them to one category. Obviously, Fatty now I became interested in the old KMT military uniforms with the blue sky and white sun medal on them. Sudbai couldn't help but shook his head. This is just like the fat man's bedroom. There are many famous calligraphy and paintings, but there are also quite a lot of fakes. This damn fat man, sometimes has really bad taste, especially for antiques, calligraphy and paintings. His appreciation level I really can't compliment him. This point is fundamentally different from Sudbai, who has lived in the upper class since he was a child. In the early years of the Republic of China, an old man and young man from the Manchu Qing dynasty invited the deposed Emperor Puyi into his home and showed Puyi his own collection. Puyi casually distinguished the true from the false. The old man and the young man also asked the deposed emperor how to identify it. Puyi simply replied, "This kind of thing was everywhere where I lived." Fat man, this is fake. Subai reminded Fatty that he really felt that it was a bit embarrassing for Fatty to stare at a fake with his eyes shining brightly. The Medal of the Blue Sky and White Sun was established by the Republic of China to commend soldiers who made outstanding contributions to defending the country. Even after the Kuomintang was defeated and fled across the Taiwan Strait, there were a total of about 200 such medals issued. The one in front of me is obviously fake. The fat man was stunned for a moment, and said with some embarrassment, "Damn, my feelings were wasted." "You are right. This military uniform and this medal are fake." The young man made tea and brought it to the coffee table. The decoration design of the entire house is very simple, and can even be said to be a bit cliché. The style is biased toward the Republic of China period. Generally, the nouveau riche who got rich first after the reform and opening up like to decorate their homes in this way. But now, even ordinary families, I wouldn't choose this one for decoration, it's too old-fashioned. The fat man sat down on the chair, picked up the tea, and saw a tea bag in the teacup. It was actually Lipton milk tea. He said a little speechlessly, "Brother, can you show off your craftsmanship or be a little more dedicated? It's too perfunctory to make tea with tea bags to entertain guests." "Yes, it's too perfunctory." The young man didn't take it seriously. He got up and went to the middle of the living room. There was a painting there. It was a portrait of Chiang Kai-shek. He was wearing a military uniform and looked quite powerful. However, this kind of portraits of great men are not that popular even in Taiwan now, just like hanging portraits of Mao and Zhu in the living rooms of mainland residents is not very popular now. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Ning Cheng. How old are you guys? If you don't mind, you can call me Big Brother." Puff. When the fat man heard this, he spat out the tea he had just put in his mouth. "Damn, I've never seen someone feel so good about themselves." Even Subai didn't know whether to laugh or cry after hearing this. The young man moved Chiang Kai-shek's portrait away, and a dark wall actually appeared inside. The dark wall was very rough in workmanship. It was probably done by the young man himself, that is, he hollowed out the inside and applied some cement. But, at this moment, there was a man hanging inside who was wrapped tightly in bandages. This guy was stealing at the bus station and I caught him. While muttering to himself, the young man took out a sharp dagger and cut the man's wrist. Then he picked up a glass next to him and caught the blood dripping from the man. The man was still alive, but in a coma and didn't even know he was being bled. After filling about half of the glass bottle, the young man moved the portrait back, and the dark wall was covered. 3 goblets were divided and fresh blood was poured into them. The young man took 1 cup himself and placed the other 2 cups on the coffee table. "I went to the hospital for testing. He is in good health and there is nothing wrong with him." The young man said this to Subai. After saying this, he took a sip first. It felt like he was tasting fine wine. Subai also picked up the cup in front of him and took a sip naturally. The blood was fresh, but it was no longer in line with Subai's taste now. Subai remembered that in the beginning, every time he was injured, as long as it was the blood of a living person, he couldn't wait, and now, it must be because the taste was so bad. It wasn't the blood of a strong man, or the kind of blood with a higher level of life. When Subai drank it, it was really boring. The fat man was disgusting next to him. He would not drink this stuff. "You are the only vampire I have found in the country in these years." Ning Cheng smiled slightly and drank the blood in the cup. His face seemed to become rosy. Subai just tasted it briefly and put the cup back on the coffee table. "You know what I'm going to do? You want my blood?" Ning Cheng directly stated Subai's purpose. "Before, many people wanted my blood. The one who is still lying in your trunk now is the one they found. A defective product made from a blood sample I left in a hospital in mainland China 20 years ago." 20 years ago, Subai said in surprise. "So, you were not in the mainland these years?" I usually stay in Taiwan or the United States. After the founding of New China, I rarely return to the mainland, Ning Cheng said frankly. Then why did you come back this time? To kill this defective product, the fat man said with an "I am an honest man, please don't lie to me" attitude. Ning Cheng shook his head. Actually, I didn't know about this defective product, but I sensed him when I got off the plane in Shanghai. Of course, he here does not refer to you. But the defective product, so I plan to get rid of it first. Unexpectedly, in the process, I actually met a real vampire. Over the years I have been in the West, I have also devoted myself to searching for vampires. However, although traces of Western vampires still exist, and I have discovered some clues, they are like scared little mice, hiding themselves tightly. Once they realize that someone is looking for them, they will not hesitate to cut off their tails to hide themselves, so in these years, you are still the first true kind of person I have seen. It's my pleasure. Subai said, but anyone with a discerning eye can see that Subai is not sitting here to reminisce about the past. In fact, from the first moment he saw this man, Subai was thinking about how to make him pure bloodline. It works on oneself, but this is difficult. The biggest difficulty is that the other party is an ordinary person. Yes, breaking out into a vampire state can indeed make his speed and strength much higher than ordinary people, but he is not an audience. Although the level of life is very high, but just like the wooden barrel theory, his barrel is filled with the most precious liquid, but because this barrel is too short and too small, the capacity of this liquid is also too low, too low. When it comes to Subai, there is no way to extract and use it. Just like Subai once obtained that drop of blood from a high-level vampire, that drop of blood did point out the direction for Subai, and also obtained some residual inheritance, but it could not directly change Subai's bloodline level, and Subai had to rely on it. With hard work, if one drop of blood essence is turned into 10 drops, or even the capacity of a cup, Subai can completely change his own blood and force his bloodline to undergo a destructive improvement. This improvement method is basically if the room for improvement of this bloodline is blocked. Other listeners who have strengthened the blood race may hesitate and give up, but for Subai, this is not a problem at all. Since the first time he exchanged the broken blood of the vampire family, his bloodline has lost the possibility of self-improvement and exchange for improvement. It has to rely on external forces to forcibly improve it every time. Simply put, people's enhancement is a broad road, relying on you can keep going by passing the time or by redeeming story points in WeChat stores. However, Subai's path to strengthening is one big mountain after another. There is no way at all. He can only rely on Subai to carry explosives every time. Pack to blast. Actually, there is only one reason why I came here. Ning Cheng took out his cell phone and placed it in front of Subai and Fatty. There is a piece of news on the phone, which was released half a month ago. The title is Purple Mountain Renovation Plan Released. This is a sign that the Nanjing municipal government is preparing to develop the Zhejiang mountain area in a drastic way. You too, I know you are interested in my bloodline. Ning Cheng looked very calm, so I think you will also be interested in Purple Mountain. Hey, let's talk about it. The fat man is a master who doesn't let go of hawks when he sees a rabbit anyway. In addition, there is the matter of Lin Zhou's corpse in front of him, and if he suddenly meets a person who has lived for many years, the fat man will not be so easy to take the bait. You too should know about Unit 731, right? Ning Cheng asked. Black Sun 731. The 731st Epidemic Prevention and Water Supply Unit of the Japanese Kwantung Army stationed in Manchuria. Subai directly said the full name. This is a unit specially used by the Japanese to conduct germ warfare research. During the war of aggression against China, the Japanese army was so crazy that they took living Chinese people. To conduct research and development of bacterial weapons, there are still ruins of Unit 731 in the northeast. Isn't Unit 731 in the northeast? What does it have to do with the Purple Mountain? Ning Cheng picked up the cup of blood from which Subai had not drunk much, drank it all in one gulp, then wiped the blood stains from the corner of his mouth and said slowly. The Nanjing massacre is not that simple. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 436. You don't mean to say that the Nanjing massacre was caused by the leak of bacteria. In order to prevent the spread of the epidemic, it had to kill people, right? The fat man's reaction surprised Subai, because the fat man not only scolded him immediately, but also stood up and grabbed Ning Cheng's neck. At this time, Ning Cheng's feet were dangling in the air and he was being held up by the fat man. It is true that Fatty's physical skills are much worse than Subai's. When Subai did not fuse his natal weapon, he was physically stronger than Fatty. Not to mention that after merging his natal weapon, Subai could directly compete with Junior, who had strengthened his wrestling skills. Fight against each other and even crush your opponents. It's just that although Fatty is a Taoist, his level of life and fundamentals are here. In addition, Fatty has also practiced martial arts before. Subai doesn't believe that Fatty only knows Qinggong and doesn't know anything else. Therefore, unless Ning Cheng shows off his vampire status, otherwise in front of the fat man, he would be like a chicken meeting an eagle. It was obvious that Ning Cheng had no intention of resisting, as he was held up by the fat man's neck. Fat man, let him explain clearly, Subai said from the side. The fat man nodded. Okay, Fatty will give you a chance to speak. However, Dabai, if he really wants to say what I just said, I will beat him to death regardless of whether you are useful or not. At worst, I'll just make it up to you. Fatty, my ancestors are from Nanjing. Before the Japanese invaded the city, my grandfather crawled out from among the dead and finally fled to Chongqing, the capital of the country. Although Fatty's ID card says he is from Sichuan, I have never forgotten when I was a child. The Japanese massacred dozens of members of my family in Nanjing. Subai was a little surprised that there was such a hidden story here. No wonder the fat man, who usually had no moral integrity and no bottom line, suddenly turned into a howling angry youth fighter. Any normal Chinese would not believe that the Japanese had it is to eliminate the infected people for the sake of the people. The fat man let go of his hand, and Ning Cheng landed on the sofa again. He adjusted his clothes slowly, without cursing, without resisting, or even with a look of resentment. However, because of being lifted up by the fat man, Subai saw the darkness appearing and then fading away from Ning Cheng's face. You don't have long to live, Subai asked. Ning Cheng was a little surprised, then nodded. Yes, I feel it too. The blood in my body is about to dry up. At most, I can survive for another half a year. That's enough. You have lived for almost 100 years, Subai said. Vampires do not have infinite lifespans, they just have much longer lifespans than ordinary people. However, Ning Cheng, a vampire, has a pure bloodline and a higher level than Subai, but he obviously does not have the power that this kind of vampire bloodline should have, just like a man has the purest and most beautiful diamond in the world, but it is smaller than an ant and not worth much. Because of this, Ning Cheng's lifespan was naturally not that long. I originally planned to spend the rest of my time in Taiwan and ignore everything, but who could have imagined that before I died, the mainland was ready to start developing the Purple Mountain. Your life in Taiwan is not that good, right? Subai looked at the fake military uniform. It was obvious that many years ago, Ning Cheng should have been a passionate and ambitious young man who joined the army. Even if he temporarily returns to the mainland, his nostalgia for that era can be seen from the decoration here. At the moment, the Kuomintang's party assets in Taiwan are about to be poached by the Democratic Progressive Party, and everyone at the top and bottom is facing liquidation. Even Chiang Kai-shek's sculptures will be rushed over by aspiring young people from time to splash some blood or paint. I guess Ning Cheng, an old reactionary, wouldn't find it very satisfying there. What I miss is that time. A party always has its prosperity and prosperity. Ning Chen was very open-minded and looked at the fat man. You said that all your ancestors died in Nanjing. It's a coincidence that my family members, too, including my wife, my parents, and my entire family, all died in the days when Nanjing was destroyed. Hearing this, Fatty's face obviously improved, because if what Ning Chen said was true, the other party was obviously more miserable than himself. Fatty was still a sperm at that time. No, Fatty's grandfather was still a child at that time, and Fatty's grandfather was still a child at that time. My dad is still a sperm, so I can't say how much he feels the same way, but that's what my family has taught me since I was a child. It's a kind of rebellion and perseverance. The Nanjing massacre occurred after the fall of Nanjing. Before that, Nanjing was the capital of the nationalist government. No matter how capable the Japanese were, it was impossible to place a germ warfare research institute like 731 in Nanjing before that. Therefore, the Nanjing massacre was an inhumane atrocity committed by the Japanese. It is too numerous to describe whether they admit it or not. It is a fact nailed to the pillars of history. However, in fact, Japan's research on germ warfare has been ongoing. Although the most famous one was Unit 731 in Manchukuo in northeast China at that time, the Japanese's enthusiasm and desire for germ warfare, Unit 731, was just the tip of the iceberg. After all, Japan's territory narrow, they have always hoped to obtain a super weapon, and maliciously use the minimum cost and resources to achieve their goal of dominating Asia. They actually have many plans and facilities. For example, when the all-out war of aggression against China began and the fighting in Shanghai was still fierce, the Japanese had already decided to place a new bacterial weapons research institute in Nanjing in the future. This is also something that can be predicted. After 3 months of fierce fighting in Shanghai, the Chinese army strategically retreated, and the Japanese army marched straight in. Given the terrain of Nanjing and the conditions at the time, there was no danger at all. But the Japanese probably did not expect that the commander-in-chief Tang Shenzi would. It was indeed too easy for Nanjing to fall by escaping like this. The 40-day massacre that followed began. Until now, the death toll has not been fully calculated. The number calculated by the domestic government is 300,000, but this 300,000 is only an approximate number, and the error is actually very large. It is very large. In fact, many Western scholars and official research institutions have made statistics, and the numerical gap is very obvious. The reasons for this are, on the one hand, the limited war conditions at that time. There were defeated national troops in Nanjing and ordinary people stranded in all directions. In addition, the Japanese massacred in various ways and with cruel methods, which caused a lot of confusion in the statistics. Trouble. On the other hand, it was because many of them were not massacred for the sake of massacre, but were captured and used as living experiments. Ning Chen took a deep breath, picked up the cup of bloody water in front of the fat man on the coffee table, and took a sip, as if to calm down the fear that had just risen in his heart. The fat man pursed his lips and said with some confusion, "The research institute you mentioned is in the Purple Mountain?" "Under the Purple Mountain?" "That's not right. Why did Little Japan come to Nanjing for this kind of bacterial weapons research?" "That 731 I've heard that the army used ordinary people and local anti-Japanese prisoners as human experiments, but why did they let them go to Nanjing?" Fatty is not a history buff, but he also knows that during the 8-year war of aggression against China, the Japanese were actually doing superficial government work in the Japanese-occupied areas, especially in the cities. The Wang puppet regime originally made Nanjing its capital. After all, Japan the country is so large. For a long time, the resource support for the Japanese army's operations in China came from the supply of Japanese-occupied areas. From the beginning of the invasion of northeast China to the complete failure of the subsequent war of aggression against China, the scale of such a long-term war was supported. The resources of the Japanese island alone are definitely not enough. In fact, the Japanese have been using the resources on the Chinese territory to fight the Chinese. Because Nanjing is in a good location, Ning Cheng showed a sarcastic smile. At that time, this organization was not only done by the Japanese, but also by the Americans, the British and even the Germans. Researchers with official background. That's nonsense, the fat man simply didn't believe it. During World War II, Britain and Japan were at each other's throats in East Asia. In Europe, Britain and Germany were also at each other's throats. Later, the United States also joined in to fight each other. Scientists from so many countries were doing research together in Nanjing? Lie. Damn it. Ning Cheng shook his head. Confrontation and games between countries are more complicated and sinister than you think. What they pursue is interests. After the Japanese surrendered, the US military blocked all the scientific research results of 731 before anyone else, and took over all Japanese projects and facilities for bacterial weapons research in China. Later, when the Japanese war criminals were tried, the International Court of Arbitration directly criticized the research on bacterial and biological weapons. Ignore, do you think, they really simply forgot? Subai nodded. Subai also knew about this. The Americans made this deal with the Japanese. However, there is one thing I don't understand. You said that at least 10,000 people, or even more, were sent to the research institute in Nanjing for human experiments. In Nanjing, a concentration camp for tens of thousands of people was built. How is it possible for people to eat, drink, and defecate without being discovered? This was something Subai couldn't understand, because neither domestic nor Taiwanese historical data revealed this. Because Ning Cheng stood up and turned his back to Subai and Fatty. He began to unbutton his shirt, and all his shirt came off at this time. The fat man's eyes immediately widened, and even Subai frowned. On Ning Cheng's back, there were large areas of corpse spots. The human experiments they wanted were to be done on dead people, not on living people. I followed the troops to retreat to Nanjing City. I planned to find my family and escape together, because at that time the organization was in chaos and everything was scattered. Already, I successfully found my family, but I couldn't escape. I saw with my own eyes that my parents and my fiancé died tragically in front of me, and were insulted in front of me. I was also killed. What they want is not a living person at all, but a dead person with a relatively well-preserved body. Preserving the dead is much simpler and more convenient than raising a group of living people in captivity.